Bloodkin by Kathy Ashford. Me. Part 2. In the year 594 AL. Chapter 13. The days at the academy stretched into weeks, and we fell into the pattern of hall life. After meditation in the mornings, Billy would lecture us on the basics of history, law, Neathi culture, and the ethical problems surrounding the use of Hyavan. Some of the most interesting pieces of information stemmed from Talgith's incessant questions. Billy, what were all the Neathi Bloods doing before the leaving? Ah, good question, Talgith. Billy always began his answers the same way. Well, without any training, they were limited to what they could figure out on their own, if anything. Have you ever heard of the old legends of witches or wizards? Well, humans were terrified of the unknown, and those with apparently supernatural powers were treated very badly. And thus, Billy launched into a history of the pre-leaving witch trials that religious leaders had instigated every so often. Oi, Billy, did no Neathi ever go outside before the leaving? Oh, yes. Good question, Talgith. Actually, a few adventurous young Neathi managed to get outside, and by all accounts they made quite an impression on any human they discovered. You would have heard of vampires in folklore, yes? Immortal creatures with red eyes that couldn't stand sunlight, performing magic and drinking human blood. The references are unfavourable, but the origin of these stories is clear. In the afternoons we would practice our Hyavan. We finally conquered the Thlau, and then Billy taught us about the other kinds of shield, beginning with protective shields like the ones Charlie had constructed when we had camped on our way to Lil. We worked on creating barriers to sound and then light, each requiring a different way of manipulating air particles. With the meditation and practice, the headaches that plagued us in the first couple of weeks, as promised, lessened, then stopped coming altogether. In the evenings at the hall, I developed something of a routine. I would do my practice and any readings as soon as we returned home from the academy, so that after dinner I could relax in the common room with the others, playing cards or just hanging out and chatting. In the weekends, I would sleep in until Charlie got bored and roused me, and he would make me meditate with him, seated on cushions in our shared room with our backs resting against a wall. Meditation was still a chore, but I realised that the number of times I had to pull my concentration back from wandering lessened every time, and soon I could almost go the full half hour with my mind clear of everything but my breathing in Hyalnya Omnya. Afterwards, I would take a leisurely bath, and we would spend the day exploring the quarter, relaxing at a cafe with some of the others, or shopping. I got myself fitted for some new footwear at a Neathi Blood cobbler, a pair of knee-high boots in black leather bristled with buckles, and had been cured with Hyavan to make them waterproof, and another pair of light court shoes, also in black leather, but picked out with a pattern of tiny holes. My good new robe arrived from the tailor, and when I first tried it on, I spent a good quarter of an hour admiring myself in the bathroom mirror, before Charlie banged it on the door, demanding to know if I was all right. Most Saturday nights we would have a few drinks at the hall with our dinners, before heading down to the Shivering Thistle to smoke red and dance. Therefore, Sundays would often find us nursing hangovers. We would share pipes of white and commiserate before Min Eve would find us and encourage us very strongly to visit the temple. We went over to Nello on the ferry a couple of times, and once Mantley invited us, all us, to her family's farm for an early lunch before the service there. But mostly we would go to the large temple attached to the Academy's School of Solistry. Sometimes we would bump into Hyum, Jimmy's previous Bloodkin, and after the ritual of gratitude, he would invite us to a small apartment in the quarter. A lovely, airy space on the third floor of the same building that housed the bookshop. He was an undeniably weird chap, with a rather deviant black sense of humour. His interest in solistry seeming to stem from some affinity with all things gruesome and macabre. But according to Mantley, after his 2 years with Jimmy, he was veritably normal compared to his formative years in Nello. These days he seemed perfectly content to pass around coffee and pastries and tell us about his training with the temple and his own time in the hall. Dunko in particular questioned him endlessly about solistry. He had already decided that was what he was going to do once he had finished at the academy. Personally, I thought being a soloist sounded awful. Digging around in human bodies with Hjavan seemed way too intimate, and more than a little bit gross. Often, after visiting home, we would potter down the street and visit Fiona at her shop, where she would test out her new blends on us willing subjects. She was constantly experimenting with different ways of receiving the healing benefits with moss, brewing teas or infusing it in clarified butter that she later used to bake sweet treats. Her biggest success was with one particular blend of white that was fruity and sweet, and a potent anti-inflammatory, and she used it to bake chocolate brownies and apple and cinnamon buns, demanding that we sample some of each. Opinion was split as to whether the moss butter tasted better with chocolate or fruit, which left her in something of a dither. She had a plan to make these pastries for humans who had delicate respiratory systems or who were elderly, who wanted the healing properties of the moss but were unable to smoke it without the use of matches or a sparklight. She showed us how to spark a pipe with Hjavan correctly, heating it until the point that the active chemicals were released, but before it actually caught fire, so we could inhale clean, sweet vapour instead of the rather unpleasant smoke of overheated moss. We had introduced some of the others to Anna and Aliak at the Thistle, taking them up to the private lounge above the bar where Anna's guards indicated that she was free to receive visitors. Thomas had spent some time in Lille over the course of his career as a mentor, and it soon became obvious that he and Fiona had an attraction that stretched back many years, even before Fiona had left Chanyo for the first time as a journeyman. No mention was made of Anna's profession, and if the others thought it odd that she had bodyguards, they said nothing. Charlie tried to pretend that his romantic feelings for her had been nothing more than a boyhood crush that ended with his time as a journeyman, and he acted like a good platonic friend. But I still noticed when he would gaze at her admiringly, sometimes longingly, when he thought no one was looking. Sometimes, if the night was relatively quiet, O'Malley himself would climb the circular stairs to sit with us. He was particularly fond of Aliak, who coddled him like a favourite uncle, patting his bald head and bestowing on him her best dimpled cheek smiles. It wasn't long before the other boys were completely enamoured with her too. She truly was ridiculously beautiful. I borrowed Dunkel's notes from class one day to catch up after I had stayed at the hall in bed with a rotten head cold, and discovered in the back a rather embarrassing, poorly written love ode about her red tumbling tresses like fire and creamy breasts of milk and honey. I briefly considered making a copy to show everyone for a laugh, but I refrained, only showing Charlie, who giggled a bit hysterically when he read it. Dirty old Dunk, eh? Who wouldn't have thought he had it in him? Go for the older ladies. I hadn't pressed Charlie on his relationship with Anna, or the supposedly unpleasant reason she had become involved with La Vesalian. The right time had just never presented itself. But my patience was rewarded one night when we were walking back from the Shivering Thistle. Our friends from the hall had gone on ahead, and we were alone as we made our way through the quarter. Charlie seemed restless, fidgety, and a bit disturbed. He kept opening his mouth and gesturing as if he was going to say something, then would close his mouth and stop, as if he couldn't decide on the right words to use. Finally, I had to ask him what the matter was. She shouldn't be doing it, that's what. Doing what? This murdering business, he exclaimed with a heavy sigh and motioned violently with one arm, as if he was trying to throw something unpleasant away. It's not in our nature to take lives, and that's what she has to decide every day when she accepts a contract. She decides who lives and who dies, and it's eating at her from the inside. It's killing her. She's done it long enough. She's paid any sort of debt she thought she owed and should stop. But I don't know how to make her. The disjointed, slightly drunken jumble of words halted for a minute as he hung his head despondently, and seeing my opportunity, I had to ask, "Charlie, what happened? You know, back then?" He looked up at the sky for a long moment and took a deep breath before beginning. "Okay, well, I knew I'd have to tell you sometime. You have a right to know, I suppose." He gathered himself and launched into his story, speaking quickly, as though if he stopped he wouldn't be able to continue. Charlie had met Anna's younger brother Joey in Fortesta, while they were both staying at the hall there as journeymen, Charlie fresh from VO, and they quickly became firm friends. They worked together at the hall for some months, like Stephen and Ellen at our hall, before travelling round it for a year, ending up in Vestberg. Joey had wanted to push on to Lille to meet up with his sister, who had just been assigned a prostitute from the city, Aliac, to mentor. Charlie wanted to wait out the winter before heading east. "I'm afraid we had a bit of a falling out," Charlie told me sadly. Joey was always in a rush to do things and get someplace, and he was headstrong, much too headstrong. Joey knew that Anna's best friend was a horticulturalist, and he had a big plan to go get some black moss and have a big party or something. Neathi journeymen were forbidden to smoke the black well outside, and Joey knew this, but thought that with his sister's connections he could get hold of some anyway. After the fight with Charlie, he took off to Lille, and Charlie stayed in Vestberg for the winter before following, figuring that Joey would have cooled off in the intervening months. When Charlie got to Lille, he was given a room at the hall and was recognised almost immediately by Anna, to whom Joey had described as his friend. However, Anna was cagey about Joey's whereabouts, only telling Charlie that yes, she had seen him, but no, she didn't know where he currently was. Charlie had thought this odd, but didn't probe deeper, already a bit in awe of the charming and graceful Neathi woman. One night, after he had been in Lille almost half a year, Charlie was walking home after drinking at the Shivering Thistle, when he was accosted in a dark doorway by a shambling, filthy creature. It took him some time to realise that it was Joey. Something terrible had happened to him. Something terrible enough to turn him from an energetic, headstrong young man into a decrepit, raving beast. Joey had mumbled something about Oaksale, a small village on the other side of the hills to the north of Lille, and then took off into the night, despite Charlie's best efforts to hold him and take him back to Anna. Deeply disturbed by this, he summoned the courage to ask Anna about it, and when he got back to the hall he knocked on her door and told her what he had just seen. Anna had been deeply saddened, but not surprised. Haltingly, she told Charlie what Joey had done when he arrived in Lille. After drinking with Anna and Fiona one night, he had broached the subject of procuring some black. Fiona, horrified, had naturally refused, but Joey had stolen her keys and broken into the horticulturalist shop where she was finishing her apprenticeship, removing a quantity of the black moss before disappearing. Charlie asked Anna if she knew why Joey had gone on about Oaksale, but she had not heard anything from her brother since the robbery. Charlie had decided to investigate, and so on his next free day he took the steam carriage through the tunnel that ran under the north hills of Lille, and found the village on the other side. While having his lunch at the small country pub, he struck off a conversation with the old man working behind the bar. He told Charlie of a night, some 3 seasons previous, when a Neathi journeyman fitting Joey's description had to be forcibly removed from the tavern. He had been wild-eyed, ranting and crazy, and the soles of his boots had worn through to the skin of his feet. What happened to Joey after being kicked out, the barkeep didn't know, but he had left along the road that led north, through the forest. Charlie had decided to follow the road Joey had taken, and a half-mile into the woods he had come across a small cottage in a clearing. The gates of the cottage were wreathed in the black ribbons of mourning, and an older woman sat in a rocking chair on the porch, black-eyed with grief, while the sounds of a screaming baby could be heard from inside. When the woman noticed Charlie, she had yelled viciously at him and tried to throw stones. "I had to use Yavin to calm her down so she would talk to me," Charlie admitted, shamefaced. She then told Charlie about her daughter, who had just died giving birth. I knew then what had happened. Before she had even said anything else, I knew what Joey had done. Joey, in a black-fueled hallucinogenic rage, had broken into the cottage that night. He had tied up the old woman before repeatedly raping her daughter, then fleeing into the night. The pair of them had been too distressed and ashamed to go to the temple, and once the pregnancy became evident, the older woman had confined her daughter to the house. Bringing the Mingle baby to term had sapped the last of the girl's strength, and she had died quietly, exhausted, a scant few hours after the baby was born. The woman begged Charlie for his help. She knew not the requirements of a Mingle infant, and was confused and dismayed by its incessant crying. She had gone into the cottage and brought out the screaming bundle, thrusting it at Charlie and demanding he take it away. So I did. It was all I could do. I took the baby. And, I prompted, I took the baby to Anya, but she was busy with Aliak. Our first and only duty as mentors is to our Bloodkin. So I was the one that took the baby down to Chanyu, and I left her with her paternal grandparents. When Aliak had graduated from the academy and had joined the temple as an apprentice solist. Aliak's a solist? I broke in, surprised. Charlie waved his hand at my interruption. Of course. This was before Anna gave her the money to buy the brothel where she had worked, before Anna had taken her to the hall. Anyway, Anna had Jeets locate Mer, the father, or master, the head of La Vassalion, and she went to him and offered to take over. I shook my head, not understanding. I don't get it. Why would she do that? Charlie sighed. It's her punishment. Well, a self-imposed penance, really. Ya Min, or Mers, is the one who accepts or declines contracts. It's a position of terrible power. Anya was so ashamed of her brother's actions, she felt she needed to do something to make up for it. Becoming Lamin was the most unpleasant thing she could think of. Well, why doesn't she just stop? It's been, 18 years? Charlie laughed mirthlessly. It doesn't work like that. She can choose a replacement if they go to her, but not everyone's up to it. I'm sure there are lots of people who would love to be in charge of the city's most ruthless and skilled assassins, but the other kind of people who should absolutely not be. There are unwritten laws about the kinds of job La Vassalion will take, so while it's illegal to murder someone, probably even more so to accept money for it, which is why her identity is a closely guarded secret, they are tolerated to a certain degree so long as they are discreet, which, of course, they are. Anya only accepts contracts where the legal system cannot accept proper justice for the victims, or where she feels the hit, he grimaced at the term, will contribute to the peace and safety of the city. Do you see, Jazz? She has the power of life and death, and it's destroying her. I didn't know what to say to cheer him up. It was pretty obvious he was in love with her, and that he was completely helpless. So, what about that stuff those guards were saying? Charlie thought for a minute. I don't know. I've heard rumours of a rival gang of assassins and some disturbing thing about Mingles, but I can't really believe it. Anya doesn't seem worried, but it's kind of hard to tell. Fucking hell, Jazz. She's changed so much. She used to be so happy and joyful, and now she's just... It's like she's constantly on guard. And she won't let me in or tell me anything important, and I... He gestured weakly. I just don't know. We had arrived back at the hall, and I could hear the others up in the common room. Charlie looked utterly defeated. You go on up and hang out with others if you want, kiddo. I just need to be alone. I shrugged and left him to it. And in the common room, if the others noticed that I was unusually quiet, they didn't say anything. End of chapter 13!